Let's talk about each way, Albo, having yet another each way when it comes to coal. Rollers chat with Auntie Fran today.
You've just said what we need is a transition to a clean energy economy. If it's stacked up, if industry was prepared to back it, would a Labor government support it, allow it?
You may as well ask me, Fran, if I support unicorns. Because
no, but I'm actually this is important because do you have a position on this?
Fran, we have a position which is it does not stack up. It will not proceed. It doesn't stack up. No private sector operator. Fran, right now, there is nothing to stop a private sector operator establishing a coal-fired power
understand,
plant.
Honestly, he does have a position. It's every position, Mark.
Well, I'm sure the hundreds of thousands of Australians who either work in the coal industry or their communities are reliant on coal income will be delighted to hear that they're like a unicorn and somehow they're mythical in the eyes of the alternative Prime Minister. But, you know, you'd have to wonder for Albanese, how do you keep the lights on, you see, because he's against nuclear, he's against coal, he's against gas. Labor's policy in New South Wales and Victoria is banning gas. So all they've got left is renewables. Now, inspired by this and knowing it's been a bit overcast and rainy in New South Wales in recent days, this morning I went to the website to find out what was actually powering up the economy. You know, what kept my toaster going, what kept the TV going, what turned on the lights in a darkened room. And it was 93% black coal, 4% hydro, 2% wind and 0 solar. So for Albanese, he had 6% of the energy supply coming from the one source that he's relying into the future, renewables. Now, you've got to understand that we're kind of dealing with science fiction here because this is the riskiest, dumbest thing you could ever do, to put all your eggs in the renewables basket and think this could power up a modern industrial economy. Already Tomago, the aluminium smelter in the Hunter Valley, have said they can't survive without coal-fired power. We know from the words of the Australian Workers' Union that there are businesses saying they couldn't come to Australia because we can't guarantee electricity supply. So we are de-industrialising already, and Albanese would make it a lot worse. But the science fiction comes from a reliance that renewables, where the sun's not shining, you haven't got solar, when the wind doesn't blow, you haven't got wind power, that somehow battery storage will be viable. There was an analysis on the left-leaning Mandarin website that pointed out that battery storage is still 10 to 40 times too expensive to be effective in the Australian context.
Correct.
And the head of AGL, that's sort of swallowed the renewables GI cordial, has said that if you went to full battery storage, renewable energy supply in Australia, you would need 350,000 shipping containers, you know, those big shipping containers full of batteries, and if you laid, these are his words, if you laid them out from Sydney to Perth, they'd go all that way and then into the Indian Ocean. So this stuff is mega expensive, mega unreliable, it's science fiction, and this is a blind leap of faith by a Labor Party that used to represent workers but now stands for de-industrialisation and blackouts. And one thing we do know, you can ignore totally Joel Fitzgibbon's words because he must have no influence in the Labor Party because his leader's now saying no future for coal. And last year the Deputy Leader, Richard Marles, said he would celebrate the collapse of the global coal market. So Fitzgibbon counts for nothing. His rhetoric is all about his own seat, and he only got active once he thought he'd lose that seat.
100%.
And the Labor policy is the worst thing that could ever happen to the Australian economy.
But see, you know, Rita, I don't know what Mark's talking about. The host of The Bachelor said that the current technology is like an old Nokia and we should be transitioning to an iPhone. And that makes perfect sense to me, even though the iPhone doesn't actually do the job of the Nokia, if that analogy is real.
Well, that is quite profound. I think people who were just on the fence from hearing that analogy have completely changed their minds. Thank God the ABC gave that very, very smart man a platform to preach that nonsense, which you know he would have, you know, pre-planned and thought of each line out and practiced it, for the love of God. What I just don't understand with Albo, I'm going to call him Kama Sutra Albo. If he's every position, then, you know, that's the Kama Sutra for me. How he can keep a straight face when it was only back in December he came out and said that he was backing coal, he was backing coal exports, coal jobs. He understood how vital it was to places where people will have a reliance on those industries. And now we're in early Feb and he's likening it to fantasy land, to unicorns. how is he the preferred Prime Minister in the polls, flip-flopping wildly like this? It's obviously working for him, and I think as long as it works for him, trying to please everybody, he's going to keep on doing it. He's not being held accountable. Did Fran bring up the quotes that he said in December in support of coal?
Of course not.
No, because he gets away with it. He gets away with it. He can state wildly different positions to different journalists, and he's not held accountable for it.
Well, you're a political historian, Troy, so maybe there's a genius that dumb old bogan me can't work out, and to call him each way elbow, and when that Prime Minister does that in the Parliament, he's just repeating Sky News rhetoric. So, what's the next level of genius that I can't see here? What's the four-dimensional chess that the bloke in Marrickville's playing?
I think if you're looking for a genius in Anthony Albanese, you'll come up empty-handed. I mean, no matter where you look. Look, I was an early and consistent critic of Anthony Albanese. I argued it before any other journalist in the press gallery that he should not be made leader of the Labor Party, and it would be disastrous. And we're seeing this unfold now, the reasons why, which is that who is the real Anthony Albanese? What does he believe in? What does he stand for? He's trying to play both sides of the fence, as you've pinned him this evening. And this is dangerous territory for the Labor Party. And I don't think it's actually that hard for Labor, but he's caught between his hard left Labor factional pedigree, dancing with the Greens on the left, never really being sure about Labor's traditional working class, socially conservative constituency, and so he's now caught between the two. But look, I mean, what he needed to do in these interviews is say, first of all, he supports the coal export industry. He supports coal mines in Australia. He supports the workers that work in those mines, and he supports the rural and regional communities who support those mines. He can do all that, and of course, if the industry wants to build a new coal mine and it stacks up economically, well then he should say, we support that. If it goes through the normal approval process, but he can't do it.
Well, the thing is,
just to add quickly, Paul, that the industry is transitioning. The industry itself is transitioning. Government policies now, Labor and Coalition for decades now, have supported a transition in the industry. That's happening anyway. He doesn't need to get caught up in it, but at the end of the day, he's got to support working class people. And this is where the Labor Party's just drifted so far, is that it no longer can support a key constituency, which is working people.
Well, Mark,
you missed one thing on his CV, proudly taking selfies with Jeremy Corbyn.
Correct.
Indeed. I mentioned that in my column today.
Who would do that? Who would do that if they were mainstream?
Exactly. Look, I wrote today, and I've written it before, I would avoid Jeremy Corbyn like the plague, wouldn't have touched him with a barge pole, and most sensible political leaders around the world did, except Anthony Albanese, who took multiple selfies with him and then shared it with the rest of the world.
Well, let's just see, in one of the tribute interviews that he does between now and then to my Sky News colleagues and everyone else who'll be inevitably hate watching this program, who gets a chance to ask politicians questions, feel free to ask him this question.
I'm a politician.
Who should be President of the United States, Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders? Let's just see what his position is about whether any of these candidates are too extreme. Because Corbyn, more than happy to become the next Prime Minister of the UK, and of course the worst result that they got since the 1930s. And of course the phalanx of brains around him that are expert in record losses. Christina Keneally and plenty of others. They know how to make a record loss. Albo.
Paul,
keep failing up, my friend.
It is worth reminding viewers that Labor's National Secretary Paul Erickson, who is a big Anthony Albanese supporter, wrote in a left faction journal a couple of years ago that Labor could learn from Jeremy Corbyn. But there were lessons here for the party to heed, and Anthony Albanese was clearly a big Jeremy Corbyn supporter, and most of the Labor left faction were Corbynistas,
correct,
just like they are Sandernistas. And this is a dead end for the Labor Party in Australia, and it's happening to what was mainstream centre-left political parties around the world, that they're shifting to the dead end of the extreme ideological left.